The silence was shattered in Buckingham Palace when Princess Anne stormed into a private royal session holding a sealed envelope. Its contents would tear through the monarchy like a blade. This wasn't just any letter. It was a letter Camilla never thought would resurface. And once read aloud, it left everyone, including King Charles, speechless. Anne had found undeniable proof that Queen Camilla had interfered with Catherine's cancer treatment. The room descended into chaos. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne's entrance alone sent a tremor across the table. Senior royals exchanged anxious glances, each one hoping the envelope wasn't what they feared. But the look in Anne's eyes, icy, determined, almost trembling with controlled rage, instantly told them this moment wasn't going to be contained or softened. Something devastating was coming, and she wasn't willing to hide it anymore. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his breath tightening when he recognized the wax seal on the letter. Camilla's seal. The very mark she used for private communications not meant to be questioned. For a brief second, even Charles looked as if he wanted to deny what he saw. He muttered, almost to himself, that there must be an explanation, but his voice betrayed a fear he could no longer ignore. Anne didn't give anyone a chance to spin, negotiate, or dismiss the gravity of what she had uncovered. Her voice cracked when she said the moment had finally come. This letter would change everything, and none of them were prepared for what it revealed. The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing down on the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. Camilla's reaction was immediate and damning. Her face drained of color, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to snatch the envelope out of Anne's hand before anyone else could see it. She stammered something about protocol, claiming the meeting wasn't the place for misunderstandings, but her panic spoke louder than anything she tried to say. And yet the envelope itself held an authority no one could deny. Addressed to an elite private hospital, stamped and signed with Camilla's unmistakable crest, it carried direct instructions regarding Catherine's treatment plan. Instructions no one else knew about. Instructions that contradicted everything the family had been told. Charles tried to intervene, urging Anne not to jump to conclusions, insisting Camilla would never do something so cruel. But Anne cut him off with a firmness that left even him silent. She told him the time for denial had passed. The truth was right there, sealed and damning, and she would read every word aloud whether they liked it or not. The tension in the room became suffocating. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath sharper. Everyone knew that once Anne opened that letter, there would be no going back. The monarchy would be forced to confront the betrayal rotting within its own walls. But what was inside the letter was even darker than anyone imagined, and it was about to uncover a trail of betrayal that started long before Catherine's diagnosis. Behind palace walls, the weight of unspoken pain was slowly crushing Catherine from within. She carried it with grace, always smiling in public, always standing beside William as the picture of strength. But away from the cameras, in the secluded serenity of the royal gardens, she once whispered the truth to Princess Anne. Her voice trembled. Her hands were cold. She wasn't afraid of the illness itself, but of being ignored. Over and over, she had begged for advanced medical referrals, even contacting specialists abroad. But nothing moved forward. It was as if her pleas evaporated into thin air, as if someone was silently erasing every step she took toward getting help. Anne remembered that moment vividly. Catherine had stopped mid-walk, her eyes glossed over, and she said, "I don't think they want me to get better." At first, Anne thought it was just the paranoia of someone under immense pressure. But then came the proof. Catherine's trusted medical team confirmed to her that not a single request for overseas consultations had ever been authorized. They hadn't even seen the documentation she swore had been sent. That revelation ignited something in Anne. She returned to Catherine's office records, hoping to trace the paper trail, but what she found was chilling. Key emails were missing. Archived folders containing sensitive medical conversations had been wiped clean. Digital logs that should have stored referral confirmations showed blank. When questioned, the Palace 1T department claimed the records were migrated to a secure archive. But even with her senior rank, Anne couldn't access it. Something was being protected, and it wasn't Catherine's privacy. Then came the shuffle. Loyal aides from Catherine's side, those who had helped organize her medical outreach, were suddenly reassigned. One to Balmoral, another to Clarence House. A third simply placed on leave. No explanations, no transfers logged. It was as if someone had reached in and dismantled Catherine's network of support, one by one. And when Anne asked questions, she was met with uncomfortable silence, polite smiles, shrugs, as if the entire palace had been instructed to look the other way. But what haunted Anne most was not the missing documents or reassigned staff. It was the image of Catherine sobbing quietly among the roses, hidden behind a marble bench in the garden, clutching a handwritten list of doctors she was never allowed to contact. She had said, "I can feel the walls closing in," and Anne had thought it was metaphorical. Now she realized it was literal. That was the moment the fog began to lift. These weren't just delays. This wasn't a clerical error. This was obstruction, intentional, targeted, and worse, it was orchestrated from somewhere high up. Someone had made a decision that Catherine's voice didn't deserve to be heard, that her illness was more politically inconvenient than personally tragic. But it wasn't until Anne dug into a forgotten file buried deep in the royal archives that she stumbled across the first, horrifying trace of Camilla's involvement. Anne hadn't gone looking for trouble. Her visit to the royal archive was supposed to be routine and administrative check on decades-old correspondence for a ceremonial speech. Yet, as she flipped through a mislabeled box of diplomatic dispatches from the 1980s, her fingers paused on something that didn't belong. It was a cream-colored envelope, sealed with the royal wax stamp, but the seal wasn't the king's. It bore Camilla's insignia, recent, deliberate, and damning. The envelope had been slipped between unrelated documents, clearly meant to be forgotten. But fate had other plans. Curious and unsettled, Anne opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the contents, and what she read made her pulse spike. The letter wasn't addressed to Catherine. In fact, it was sent without her knowledge. It was written to the administrative board of a private elite hospital, one of the few places with the technology advanced enough to treat Catherine's condition discreetly. The letter stated in clinical, calculated language that any requests for approval concerning non-queen consort royals be denied. The directive was not to delay but to block. The justification, preserving institutional hierarchy and protecting the crown's visual integrity. And there it was, at the bottom, Camilla's own signature, Camilla, Queen Consort. Anne's throat tightened as she read the next line. It referenced Subject Orion. The codename had been used internally to refer to Catherine when handling sensitive health matters. There was no question who this letter was about. And worse, this wasn't just interference, it was obstruction with full intent. Another line referenced approval redirection and made mention of limiting exposure to unauthorized sympathy optics, implying that Catherine's suffering had been seen as a public relations threat. The implications were suffocating. Anne sat motionless for a moment, overwhelmed not just by the contents, but by how calculated the act was. It wasn't some offhand remark or political coldness. It was a policy, designed, executed, and hidden. Catherine hadn't been imagining the resistance. She'd been actively silenced. And now, for the first time, Anne had proof. The file had been misfiled in the wrong decade, either through error or design, but Anne knew this wasn't coincidence. Someone didn't just want it lost. They wanted it buried, undisturbed. But fate had placed it in Anne's hands, and she understood what that meant. This was no longer about politics. It was personal. Camilla had crossed a line that no royal, no matter their crown, had the right to cross. Anne placed the letter back into its envelope and secured it in her inner coat pocket. Every step out of the archive felt heavier than the last. The monarchy had buried many secrets over the decades, but this one had the potential to burn everything to the ground. And if the royals wouldn't face it willingly, she would force them to. Anne knew this couldn't remain hidden, and there was only one other person who had noticed these redirections before, a dismissed palace physician who vanished under suspicious terms. Dr. Leland Carter was once a quiet but respected figure within the royal medical circles. Known for his discretion and expertise, he had overseen several sensitive cases involving the royal family. But then, without a trace, he vanished from the palace roster. No official announcement, no media coverage. His office emptied overnight. To most, it was just another quiet reshuffle behind royal walls. But to Anne, it was the first sign that someone had buried more than just paperwork. She had heard whispers how Dr. Carter had pushed for urgent treatment for Catherine, how he had voiced concerns about unexplained administrative blocks, and then suddenly, he was gone. Anne's instincts told her he hadn't disappeared willingly. With Camilla's letter burning a hole in her coat pocket, she needed confirmation from someone who had been inside the medical bureaucracy when it all unfolded. So, she reached out not through official channels, but through quiet, trusted contacts. After weeks of discreet attempts, she finally received a one-line reply through a retired palace staffer: "He'll meet you, privately. No records." The location? A secluded estate on the outskirts of Norfolk, far from the gaze of royal advisors and press vultures. When Anne arrived, Dr. Carter was already waiting, older, worn, eyes heavy with what looked like guilt and grief. The moment they sat down, he began to speak not in anger, but in quiet devastation. He confirmed everything Anne feared. He had written multiple recommendations urging immediate overseas treatment for Catherine, citing her condition as time-sensitive and highly responsive to specialized therapies unavailable within the UK. His proposals were forwarded to the palace's medical administrative board and then disappeared. He never received replies. Instead, he got summoned not to a hospital, but to a private consultation at Clarence House. There, a royal representative handed him a sealed letter and order to cease all external referrals related to non-primary consort care. The instruction was blunt. His jurisdiction was limited to observation and maintenance, not escalation. The origin of the order? Her Majesty Camilla's office. It was written plainly, no attempt to veil the directive behind bureaucratic jargon. Dr. Carter admitted he tried to push back. He sent a final memorandum warning that delays could compromise Catherine's recovery. Days later, his clearance was revoked. A confidentiality clause was activated. He was given a severance package and advised to relocate for privacy and peace. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was exile. And he had remained silent, until now. He reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a small folder. Inside were printed email threads, redacted reports, and 2 memos clearly stamped rejected, not authorized for review. One was his original treatment recommendation. The other was the blocked hospital request from Catherine's office that never made it past internal approval. Anne's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. These were no longer just suspicions or circumstantial evidence. This was a chain of deliberate suppression, sealed by someone who feared Catherine's recovery would overshadow her reign. And now, for the first time, that chain had a clear origin, a clear target, and undeniable proof. With the doctor's proof in hand and Camilla's letter now in the open, Anne prepared for a confrontation that would split the monarchy at its core. The private summit at Balmoral had been called under the guise of strategy, a routine gathering of the monarchy's key figures to discuss press management and public appearances. But Princess Anne had something far more explosive in mind. As the meeting commenced behind thick wooden doors, Anne placed a folder on the long oak table. The room fell silent as she slowly opened it and spread out a stack of documents, each one a blade aimed at the heart of the monarchy. The contents? Camilla's sealed letter denying Catherine medical treatment, Dr. Leland Carter's testimony, redacted memos with Camilla's signature. This wasn't speculation, this was a reckoning. Charles looked visibly shaken, his hands clenching the sides of his chair as he skimmed the evidence. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Camilla, on the other hand, went immediately on the attack. Her voice sharpened with fury as she accused Anne of fabricating the entire ordeal. She dismissed the documents as forgeries. She claimed Anne had been harboring resentment for years and was using Catherine's illness as a weapon in a long-running vendetta. But her words rang hollow, desperate. Even those who once stood beside her exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then came William's eruption. Until that moment, he had been silent, seated next to his father with his head down. But as Camilla's denials escalated, William rose from his chair and slammed a hand against the table. He didn't yell, but his voice carried a weight that shattered the room. "Leave," he said, staring directly at Camilla. "You don't get to speak for her anymore." Anne, steady and unshaken, recounted Catherine's pleas, with vivid detail. She spoke of the nights Catherine wept in private, of the medical letters that vanished, of the isolation she felt within her own family. Her voice cracked only once when she repeated Catherine's words, I don't think they want me to get better." The room sat in stunned silence. Charles remained caught in the crossfire. Torn between his loyalty to the woman he crowned and the daughter-in-law he had failed to protect, his silence spoke volumes. The weight of his inaction hung in the air. No one came to Camilla's defense, but the confrontation didn't stay inside the castle walls. Within hours, aides began whispering to reporters. Leaks trickled out, headlines exploded with speculation. Camilla accused of blocking Kate's cancer care. The royal press office scrambled to contain the fallout, but the damage was done. Balmoral had gone from strategy room to battleground. But what no one expected was the final twist, proof that Camilla had financial motives behind her actions. And Catherine's suffering wasn't just personal, it was political. The confrontation at Balmoral had barely subsided when another wave of revelations emerged, this time not from Anne, but from an anonymous insider deep within the palace machine. A confidential document, labeled Operation Sovereign Optics, was leaked to a former royal aide turned whistleblower. Its contents confirmed what many had long suspected, but never dared to say aloud. Camilla's team had engineered a coordinated campaign, not just to manage her image, but to deliberately sideline Catherine's illness from public view. And not for compassion, for control. The memo was unmistakably authentic. It bore the signature of a senior press advisor and detailed a chilling timeline. At the top of the document, a bold red warning was stamped: optics risk due to Catherine's diagnosis. Beneath it, bullet points outlined talking points, scheduling adjustments, and the directive to delay any disclosures of Catherine's condition until Camilla's upcoming global charity tour was complete. There, in black and white, was the strategy. Public sympathy for Catherine's battle, it warned, could overshadow Camilla's charitable rebranding as the people's queen. That could not be allowed. Anne read the report in stunned silence. The timeline matched perfectly with the medical obstructions Catherine had faced, the delays in treatment, the sudden silence from hospitals, and the blocked memos Dr. Carter had kept. It wasn't just indifference, it was active interference, masked under the guise of media management. What struck Anne most was a line buried in the second page. A private PR firm, reportedly paid with discretionary funds originally allocated to health outreach programs, had been hired to reinforce public warmth toward Her Majesty Camilla during sensitive transitional months. In plain terms, palace money meant for care and compassion had been redirected to manipulate headlines. Every update on Catherine's condition had been reviewed, revised, or outright suppressed. Recommendations from medical staff were labeled non-critical delays and sent to Camilla's office for approval that never came. And with each day that passed, the world remained unaware that behind palace walls, one woman's survival was being weighed against another's public legacy. The document's final page listed status summaries from Camilla's own chief of staff. Next to each decision point, one name appeared repeatedly under the sign-off column: Camilla. There was no room for misinterpretation. She hadn't just known, she had orchestrated it. As the media frenzy around Balmoral swelled, the leak ignited a new blaze. Journalists began connecting the dots. Analysts tore through event records and press releases. They saw at every high-profile photo op, every soft-focus interview, perfectly timed to outshine the silent struggle Catherine was enduring behind the palace gates. And still, Camilla hadn't responded. With the monarchy's internal rot now bleeding into the public sphere, Princess Anne made one final move, exposing the letter in front of the world. The Royal Charity Gala was supposed to be a celebration of Queen Camilla's philanthropic work, a polished, carefully staged evening designed to reframe her image as the compassionate matriarch of the monarchy. But what unfolded instead was a public unmasking, unlike anything the royal family had ever endured. Princess Anne, uninvited to the speakers list, stepped forward from her table as the applause faded from Camilla's opening tribute. Without asking, without waiting, she approached the podium. The room stilled. The press, accustomed to Anne's quiet discipline, immediately sensed something was wrong. She didn't smile. She didn't greet. She simply raised a folded document above her head and said, "The people deserve the truth." And then she began to read. It was the exact letter Camilla's letter sealed months ago and buried within the royal archives, instructing the denial of specialized cancer treatment for Princess Catherine. Word for word, she read it aloud. Every line, Every phrase about non-queen consort royals, every reference to Catherine as subject Orion, every chilling justification for why the Princess of Wales should be denied urgent care so Camilla's public appearances wouldn't be overshadowed by sympathy. The audience was stunned into silence. Faces turned pale. Phones were raised, recording every second. As Anne continued, her voice unwavering, a gasp swept through the room when she revealed the second memo, the Operation's sovereign optics strategy to delay Catherine's care for the sake of Camilla's image. The evidence was undeniable, projected on the screens behind her as aides scrambled to shut them off. But it was too late. Twitter lit up instantly. Headlines were drafted mid-sentence. Camilla exposed in cancer cover-up. Royal sabotage confirmed. Camilla, who had been seated just feet away, rose slowly. Her face was unreadable, but the color had drained from it entirely. She left the ballroom without a word, her security detail quickly forming a shield around her. Not a single royal followed, not even Charles. Anne didn't chase her, she didn't need to. The damage was done not out of vengeance but out of loyalty to truth. When she stepped away from the microphone, reporters swarmed the event. Guests were visibly shaken. Some cried, others refused to comment. But the consensus was clear: Camilla had crossed a line, and Anne had drawn one back in the name of justice. The palace issued no immediate statement. There were no attempts to spin the event, and for the first time in royal memory, the institution looked paralyzed, unprepared for the storm that had been brewing right under their nose. The fallout was swift, but the emotional toll on William and Catherine would be even deeper, and it would push William to take an irreversible stand. After days of devastating silence, Prince William stepped forward, not as a son, not as an heir, but as a man at war with betrayal. There was no press release, no choreographed palace announcement. Instead, a private press pool was summoned under tight restrictions. Cameras were limited, no statements were leaked in advance. And when William entered the room, his expression alone said everything. This wasn't politics, this was personal. Before speaking, William had consulted only two people, Anne and Catherine. Together, behind closed doors, they weighed the risk of going public against the price of staying silent. Catherine, still recovering from the emotional fallout of Camilla's sabotage, gave her blessing. Anne, ever the guardian of justice, urged him forward. And William, carrying both fury and purpose, chose to act not just for his wife, but for the future of the monarchy itself. He stood without notes, without flinching. His voice was steady, but there was unmistakable steel beneath it. In recent days, he began, the nation has witnessed revelations that strike at the very soul of our institution. Acts of betrayal, calculated, cruel, and concealed, have come to light. This family owes the people, and each other, accountability. The room held its breath as he continued. Without naming her directly, William confirmed that Queen Camilla had engaged in actions that deliberately obstructed urgent medical care for Catherine. He acknowledged the letter, the archived documents, the leaked memo. He confirmed their authenticity and condemned them as morally indefensible. Then came the moment no one had expected. William announced that effective immediately, Camilla would be stripped of all advisory roles connected to royal health initiatives, charities, and medical partnerships. Her influence in those spheres once celebrated was over. No royal, William declared, regardless of title or tenure, has the right to place personal ambition above the well-being of family. He also announced a sweeping new reform inside the palace, one that would prevent any single royal office from having unchecked control over internal healthcare decisions. A new oversight committee would be formed, consisting of independent experts, including voices from outside the monarchy. Transparency, he said, was no longer optional. William's voice cracked only once when he turned to the subject of Catherine. She trusted us, and we failed her, but I promise you this, it will never happen again. Never. He didn't take questions, he didn't linger, he simply walked away, leaving behind a monarchy forever changed. The message was clear. Camilla's era of quiet manipulation was over. The heir to the throne had spoken, and the line had been drawn not in ink but in fire. The palace could no longer bury the truth behind protocol. William had ensured that, and in doing so, he became more than a prince. He became a protector. But even as the monarchy braced for reform, one final secret remained, and it would change how the public remembered Queen Camilla forever. In the days following William's explosive decree, the world held its breath. The palace remained tight-lipped. Camilla vanished from public life. But then something surfaced, a single page, torn from the center of a floral-bound diary. No watermark, no official insignia. Just handwriting familiar, elegant, unmistakably Catherine's. It was quietly released to a journalist by someone close to the family. The timing was no accident. The message was never meant for the world, but once read, it could never be forgotten. The page began without preamble. No date, no greeting, just the words, "I never feared the illness." Only the silence of those who could have helped. It was as if every suppressed cry, every unanswered question, every vanished file had finally found its voice. Catherine knew. She had known all along that something wasn't right, that behind the reassurances and palace smiles, a shadow was growing. She had sensed the redirections, the hesitation, the slow suffocation of her autonomy. And in that page, she didn't rage, she grieved, not just for herself, but for what it meant, for how easily silence could be used as a weapon. She wrote of her trust in Anne, of the strength she drew from their quiet moments in the gardens, of how Anne had become her last thread to sanity when the walls around her began to shift. But the passage that shattered the public's heart came near the end. "I feared dying," misunderstood more than dying, because the truth wasn't just about my health, it was about what we let happen in silence, generation after generation. It was a sentence that held centuries of royal rot in one breath. And with it, the final nail in Camilla's public legacy was driven in. Social media ignited. News anchors read the diary entry on air with trembling voices. Editorials praised Catherine's grace under siege. Candlelight vigils began outside hospitals bearing her name. The world, once fed polished statements and curated smiles, was now mourning the quiet suffering of a woman who never wanted to be a symbol but had become one. Inside the palace, Camilla reportedly refused to leave Windsor. Her team released no statements, no rebuttals. Friends close to her admitted she was cut off, both emotionally and structurally. Doors were closed. Titles were now ceremonial. Her presence, once dominant, had become an echo in gilded halls, and behind every whisper of sympathy now lingered a question: how long had this gone on, and who else had enabled it? Catherine's excerpt was never officially verified, but it didn't matter. Its authenticity was etched in every syllable: the strength, the heartbreak, the refusal to name names, yet the clarity in her sorrow. And through it, she did what the monarchy failed to do. She told the truth, without fear. The monarchy may survive the storm, but the scars from this betrayal will shape its future forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.